Archangel Michael says, "There's something buried beneath your childhood home. It's time to know what it is." It was late evening when the sky outside your window turned a strange shade of gray. You weren't dreaming, and yet it felt like a dream had stepped into your waking life. The birds stopped singing. The air held its breath. That's when the voice came. It wasn't loud. It didn't shake the walls, but it shook something inside your bones. The voice said, "There's something buried beneath your childhood home. It's time to know what it is." You didn't move at first, but something started to stir inside your spirit. A knowing, a pull, a calling you couldn't deny anymore. You remembered your old home, the peeling blue paint, the cracked porch step, the room with the yellow curtain, the long hallway that always felt too cold. There were things about that place you didn't want to remember. But now, something sacred was calling you back, not to relive the past, but to uncover what was hidden in it. The voice returned again, stronger. The ground remembers. The foundation kept the secret. Now it's your time to see. You whispered one word back, "Why?" And the voice answered, "Because the hidden things still breathe." You tried to explain it to yourself. Maybe it was just a feeling. But your dreams changed that night. You saw the old house again. You were standing in the living room. The floorboards opened up by themselves, and beneath them not dirt, not pipes, but pages, old pages, wrapped in gold thread, and a name you'd forgotten how to say. The dream ended with a knock from beneath the floor. Someone was still under there, waiting. You woke up with tears on your face. You hadn't cried in years. But this wasn't sorrow. It was recognition. Something from long ago wanted to speak. Not from a photo album. Not from a diary. Not from the soil. And not just any soil. Your childhood ground. It had held the truth quietly for years. Now the silence had expired, and the truth had permission to rise. Not to hurt you, but to heal you. Not to haunt you, but to help you walk forward. You looked in the mirror that morning. Your reflection looked tired but alert, as if your spirit had already begun the journey before your body agreed. You wrote the words down, buried beneath. Oh, and even your hand trembled. You knew this wasn't a memory issue. This was a spiritual summons. Something divine was pulling you back, not to the house, but to what it has been hiding. What had been waiting. What had been buried, not to stay hidden, but to be revealed at the appointed time. This is the moment Archangel Michael speaks again. And he says with full authority, "There's a reason you've returned. Not everyone gets called back to the place they came from. But when they do, it's because heaven has something to uncover there. You will not go alone. I am with you." And with those words, the wind outside shifted. It blew toward your house, like even the air remembered. Type "I am chosen to get the blessing" 4444. The next morning, you searched through your old things. You didn't know why, but something told you that the answer had already come once before. You found an old notebook from school, and inside it was a folded piece of paper. It looked yellow with age. The handwriting was yours. It was a letter you had written long ago, but never sent. You began to read it. The first line said, "If anyone finds this, please don't forget who I was before the silence." You felt your heart stop for a second. You had no memory of writing those words. The letter spoke of things you couldn't explain. Dreams that repeated. A shadow in the hallway. whispers that came from under the floor late at night. You had written about digging once, near the tree in the backyard. You had found something metal, but before you could take it out, your mother had called you in. You forgot all about it, but the letter didn't forget. It said, "There's something here that belongs to the light, but it's trapped under the soil." And the last line was the most haunting. "I think someone left it for me, but maybe it was for you." Type I am marked to get the blessing 1187. You put the letter down and look out the window. Your childhood home was still there and touch. It was empty now, but not abandoned. The neighbors always said strange things about that house. That it stayed warmer than it should in winter. That no matter how many times they fixed the lights, they flickered again. You remembered one day when you were young, how the basement door opened on its own. You thought it was just the wind. But now, the memories felt different. They felt like warnings you hadn't understood at the time. As the sun rose higher, you packed a small bag, a flashlight, gloves, the old keys you never threw away, and the letter. You had no plan except to go back. The house was yours again now. No one had lived in it since your father passed, but something had stayed behind. You could feel it even before you stepped inside. The moment your foot touched the old porch, a wave of cold air passed over you, like the house knew you had returned. Type I am rising to get the blessing 7856. You opened the door slowly. Everything was quiet. Dust floated in the light coming through the windows. The house had not changed much. The same wooden floors. The same clock on the wall, though it had stopped ticking years ago. You walked down the hallway toward your old room. The yellow curtain was still there, faded now, but still moving gently, like someone had just passed through. And then you heard it, a small sound. Not loud, just a tap, from under the floorboards. You knelt down. The boards were loose. Maybe they always had been. You pulled one up. Beneath it was only darkness at first. But then you saw it. A small object wrapped in black cloth. You reached in and took it out. It was heavier than it looked. You unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a rusted tin box. You opened it. There were photos. Old ones. But not of your family. These were strangers. Except not really. One of the faces looked like your mother, but younger. Much younger. And next to her was a name. Alara. Type I am called to get the blessing 6621. You stared at the photo. You had never heard that name before. Your mother's name was different. Or was it? Had you changed it? Had you hidden something? You picked up another photo. It showed the same woman, standing near the backyard tree. She had something in her hand. Something metal. Your heart dropped. Was this what you had started to dig up as a child? Was this what your mother never told you? You didn't know yet. But you knew the photos were just the beginning. You stood up, holding the box close. You whispered to the house, "I'm listening now." And in the silence that followed, you felt something shift. Not in fear, but in truth. The journey had begun, and the house was ready to speak again. Up I'm anointed to get the blessing 9999. You sat on the floor for a long time, holding the box. The name Alara kept repeating in your mind. It was like a soft drumbeat that wouldn't stop. You knew that name was important, but you didn't know why. You searched through the rest of the photos. Some were damaged. Others were clear. In many of them, Laura stood near the house, sometimes with a book, sometimes near the tree, and once with a child. A small child with a face that looked like yours. You touched the photo gently. Was that really you? You turned the photo over. Something was written on the back. He must never know. The handwriting was delicate and careful, like it came from someone who was afraid. The words made your skin go cold. You was he. Why were they hiding something from you? And more than that, why had no one told you about Alara? Your mother never said that name. Your father never spoke about it. You searched your childhood memories for any hint, but there was nothing. It was like someone had erased Alara from your life on purpose. Type I am awakened to get the blessing 5423. You stood and walked to the backyard. The tree was still there, taller now. The wind moved through its branches like it remembered to. You stepped around to the spot you had once tried to dig as a child. The ground looked normal, but your spirit knew it wasn't. You started digging with your hands. The soil was soft, almost as if it had been touched recently. A few inches down, your fingers scraped something hard. You cleared the dirt and found a small silver key. Your heart raced. This wasn't normal. This wasn't random. The house was giving you what it had kept hidden. You took the key inside and searched the house. Where did it belong? It didn't match the front door or the back. It didn't fit any cabinet. But then you remembered the basement. There had always been a locked cupboard there, one your father told you never to open. He said it was broken. But now you wondered, was that a lie? You went downstairs. The basement was dark and cold. The air felt heavy. But you kept walking. You found the old cupboard. You placed the key in the lock, and it clicked open like it had been waiting for years. Type I am chosen to get the blessing 8710. Inside the cupboard was a wooden box with carvings on the top. Not random shapes, symbols. You didn't know what they meant, but they looked holy, ancient, and powerful. You opened the box and found a leather-bound journal. The name on the cover was Alara. You opened it slowly. The first page read, for the child of the house. One day, you will need to know. You began reading. Alara wrote about dreams, visions, and voices. She wrote about something buried. Not just under the house, but under the bloodline. A curse. A secret. A blessing that was never spoken. You turned the pages and read faster. Alara was your grandmother. She hadn't changed her name and hidden herself. She had been chosen to carry something sacred, but someone had tried to take it from her. That's why she buried it. That's why she left signs only a child with her blood could follow. Your heart beat faster with every line. You weren't just discovering a family story. You were walking into a divine assignment. The house was more than a house. It was an altar. And the thing buried wasn't an object. It was a calling. Type I am the vessel to get the blessing 4562. You turned to the last page of a journal. Alara had written, "When you find this, you must finish what I began. The blessing must be unlocked. The ground must be anointed. Only then will the voices stop. Only then will the curse break." You closed the journal and held it close. You didn't know how, but you would do it. You had to. The journey had changed you now. This wasn't about knowing what was buried. It was about restoring what had been hidden from heaven's sight. And it started with your obedience. Type I am ready to get the blessing 3303. If this message is reaching into your soul right now, know this. You were meant to hear it. You're not just watching, you're part of this mission. When you support this message through YouTube Super Thanks, membership, or a PayPal offering, link is in the description. You're not giving to a channel. You're planting seed in the soil of someone's breakthrough. God says in Isaiah 55:11, "My word will not return to me empty." And you are helping send that word where it must go. I felt led to say this right now. You are the reason someone else will hear what heaven is speaking. Let this act of giving be your agreement with divine timing. As you pour, may rivers of increase flow back into your life. You walked through the house again, but this time, everything felt different. The walls didn't just hold old paint. They held memories, some yours, and some not. You stopped near the room at the end of the hallway. It was always locked when you were a child. Your parents told you it was a storage room. You believed them. But now, you wondered what was really behind that door. You touched the handle. To your surprise, it turned. The door opened easily, as if it had been waiting for you all along. The room smelled of dust and something older. Maybe wood, maybe time itself. There were boxes stacked high, covered in sheets. You pulled one sheet down and saw an old crib. You didn't understand. You were an only child. Who used this crib? You looked around and saw baby clothes folded neatly, untouched. Then your eyes stopped on something strange. On the wall was a name written in faded chalk, Michael. You whispered it out loud, and the room seemed to breathe with its sound. Who was Micah? Type I am seeking to get the blessing 6219. You searched through the boxes. Most of them held old toys, blankets, letters, but all written to Micah. Some were in your mother's handwriting. Others looked like your father's. Your hands shook as you held a card that read, "To our little light, Micah, may you always feel safe." Your chest had tightened. You had never seen or heard anything about a Micah. I vote. Not a story. Not a trace. It was like this child had been erased, hidden away, just like Alara. You began to feel that everything in your family had been covered with silence. In the corner of the room was a small bookshelf. On the lowest shelf, pushed all the way to the back, was a black notebook. It had no name on the front. You opened it slowly. Inside were pages written by your father. He spoke of dreams, just like Alara did. He spoke of Micah. He came to us like fire. One line read, "But the fire was too much. We had to let him go." Another line said, "We buried his things to keep the house quiet." That word again, buried. Your whole family had been burying secrets, not just in the ground, but in their hearts. Type I am unlocking to get the blessing 2331. You sat on the floor, surrounded by the baby clothes, the letters, the crib. And for the first time in years, you cried for someone you never knew. Micah wasn't a stranger now. He was your brother, a brother whose name had never been spoken. But you spoke it now. Micah, you said again. And with that, the light in the room grew brighter, as if heaven itself had been waiting for someone to say his name again. A sense of peace filled the space. A holy peace. You knew this room was more than a nursery. It was a resting place for a soul that had waited to be remembered. You stood and whispered, "I know now, and I will not forget." You placed the notebook back where you found it, but took one small baby sock with you, not as a token, but as a promise, to uncover every part of the story. You walked back down the hallway, holding the sock close to your chest. Your steps felt lighter, but your spirit felt heavier. You had found one truth. but you could feel more waiting, deeper, older, heavier truths. Still buried. Still breathing. Type I am remembering to get the blessing 9044. As you passed the mirror in the hallway, something strange happened. Your reflection stayed still even after you had moved. You looked back at it. For a moment, it wasn't just you. It was your mother. Younger. Holding the same baby sock. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. She had carried this pain alone. And now, it was your turn to carry it to the light. You nodded to the mirror. And just like that, the reflection faded. Your reflection returned. But something in you had changed. You whispered under your breath, "Micah, I will finish what they could not." And as you walked toward the staircase, the air around you shifted again. The house was listening. The truth was waking up. And the ground beneath you was no longer just dirt. It was sacred now, waiting for what comes next. Type I am chosen to get the blessing 3476. You didn't sleep that night. The house had grown quiet again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that felt full, like something was holding its breath. You lay on the couch, journal in hand, reading Alara's words over and over. She kept mentioning the voice under the stairs. At first, it seemed like a dream, but the more you read, the more you knew it was real. He had heard something. Not once. Many times. She said the voice only came when the moon was full. You looked out the window. Tonight, the moon was whole. You rose slowly and walked to the staircase. Each step creaked beneath your feet. When you reached the bottom, you stood still. You placed your hand on the wall, just under the staircase. Alara's journal said, "Knock 3 times. Wait, and listen." You knocked. 1, 2, 3. You waited. For a moment, nothing happened. But then there it was. A soft, low whisper. It wasn't speaking words you understood. But it was there. And it was alive. You took a step back. You weren't afraid. You were being called. Type I am listening to get the blessing 5702. You looked closer at the wall. The wallpaper was peeling. You pulled it back and saw a small wooden panel. You tapped it gently. It sounded hollow. There was something behind it. You found a screwdriver and began to pry the panel off. Behind it was a hidden space, just wide enough to fit a person. The air inside was cold, dusty, but not empty. You reached inside and found a metal box, smaller than the first one. You brought it out and sat on the floor. Inside the box was a stack of folded papers, tied with red thread. You opened the first one. It was a letter from Alara, written to her future grandchild. If you are reading this," it said, "then the ground has spoken again." She talked about the voice beneath the stairs. She said it belonged to someone who never left. Someone who made a promise to protect the house until the curse was lifted. The name written at the bottom of the letter was Abiel. Type I am chosen to get the blessing 1908. You had never heard that name before. But as soon as you said it out loud, the whisper returned. Louder now. Abiel, you whispered again. And for the first time, the voice answered. Yes. One word. Clear. Deal. Peaceful. You held your breath. You weren't speaking to a ghost. You were speaking to a guardian. A keeper of the secret. You asked, why are you still here? The voice replied because the light was buried, and the blood never spoke. You didn't know what it meant yet, but you knew this was not the end. It was just the opening of a deeper truth. You looked back inside the box. Beneath the letters was a cloth pouch. You opened it carefully and found a silver ring inside. The symbol on it matched the carvings on Alara's journal. You slipped the ring on your finger. The moment you did, you felt a warmth travel through your hand, up your arm, into your chest. The voice spoke again. Now you carried the seal. You looked around, but saw no one. Still, the house felt different. It recognized you now, not just as a visitor, but as the one who was called. Type I am carrying the light to get the blessing 4112. You stood and looked at the space under the stairs. You didn't feel fear anymore. You felt protected. Like Abiel was still there, watching, still keeping the house safe. Alara had written, he was sent by heaven when the family could no longer fight. You whispered, thank you. And though the voice did not speak again, you knew it had heard you. You placed the panel back, gently, and walked upstairs. The silver ring pulsed gently against your skin. Back in the living room, you placed the letters on the table. So many secrets had been kept, but they were secrets made of light, not darkness. They weren't meant to stay hidden. They were waiting for the right hands, the right heart, the right time. And now, the time had come. Type I am the light bearer to get the blessing 7789. The next morning, the sunlight came through the windows in a strange way. It was brighter than usual, but it didn't feel warm. It felt like it was pointing at something. You followed the light until it stopped at the fireplace. That fireplace had never worked. Your parents always said it was just decoration. But now, something about it felt alive. You knelt in front of it. The bricks were old, some cracked, some loose. You touched one of them, and it moved. Behind it, there was a small space. Inside that space, there was a single candle. The candle was white, tall, and untouched. No matches, no wax drops. But when you held it, the wick started glowing. Just glowing, no flame. You didn't understand how, but you felt no fear. The candle was warm in your hand. You heard a soft voice in your spirit, not like before, not from outside. This one came from within. It said, "This is the last light Alara prayed over." It never went out. You held the candle close. You remembered something Alara wrote in her journal. One light must stay alive, even when all else goes dark. Type I am the flame to get the blessing 6033. You walked around the house holding the candle. As you moved, the glow became stronger near certain places, like the candle was reacting. When you entered the hallway with the mirror, the glow became a soft blue. When you stepped near the stairs, it became golden. You finally returned to the room where you found Micah's things. As soon as you crossed the doorway, the candle's light turned deep red. You stood still. The Archangel. It was like the room was waiting for something only the candle could reveal. You placed the candle on the small table beside the crib. The glow filled the room. And then, you saw it. On the wall above the crib, words began to appear, slowly, as if written by invisible hands. You read, Michael was never lost. He was hidden, protected, until the one with light returned. Your knees weakened. You sat on the floor and wept, not just for sorrow, but for the mystery finally breaking open. Your brother's story was not one of death. It was one of divine hiding. Type I am returning light to get the blessing 8991. You reached for the journal again. Laura had written, Micah's spirit was too bright for the time he was born into. So heaven wrapped him in silence. But when the light bearer arrives, he will rise again. Not in flesh but in purpose. You looked at the candle. You looked at the crib. You whispered, I will carry his purpose. And something shifted inside you. A sense of strength. A sense of promise. This was no longer about discovering the past. This was about completing what had been left undone. Suddenly, the candle flame turned into real fire. Soft, golden, and steady. You didn't light it. It lit itself. The room filled with warmth, and a gentle wind passed through. Though all windows were closed, you knew what it meant. The hidden light had been found. And now, the time had come to bring it out, to let it shine beyond the house, beyond the memory, beyond the pain. Type I am alive in purpose to get the blessing 7204. You held the candle and walked to the front of the house. You stood on the porch as the light danced in the daylight. You lifted the candle high and said, This house will no longer hide. This ground will no longer stay silent. The light has come home. You could feel the energy in the wind change. You could sense something in the heavens shift. The past was no longer holding you. It was now walking with you. And Micah was not gone. He was with you. In every step forward. As you walked back inside, the candle's flame stayed strong. And didn't flicker. And didn't fade. Just like Alara said, it would never burn out. Not in your hand. Not in your bloodline. Not in the calling you were now chosen to complete. Type I am walking in light to get the blessing 2671. That afternoon, you felt drawn to the attic. You had never liked that part of the house. It always felt too cold, too dark, too far from everything. But now, something inside you said go up. You carried the glowing candle in one hand and slowly climbed the attic stairs. Each step made a soft creak, like the house itself was watching. When you opened the attic door, dust filled the air. Boxes were piled everywhere, untouched for years. You stepped inside and waited. The candles light flickered blue. It meant something was near. You walked past old toys, books, and forgotten clothes. In the corner, under a dirty sheet, you saw a wooden chest. You pulled the sheet off, coughing from the dust. The chest had carvings just like Alara's journal. You opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a large Bible. The cover was cracked with age. You held it in your hands. It felt heavier than it looked. You sat down and opened the first page. There was no writing, just a strange drawing, an eye inside a flame. You turned the page, then another. Most of the pages were torn or missing. Type I am chosen for truth to get the blessing 4892. You flipped through the Bible carefully. The pages that were still there looked different from any Bible you had seen. Some verses were underlined in red. Some had writing in the margins. Laura's handwriting. She had written notes beside each verse. One note said, "This verse is the seed. Speak it near the candle." You read the verse aloud. "What was hidden shall be revealed, and what was buried shall rise." The candle's flame turned white. A wind moved through the attic even though no window was open. A scroll fell out from between the pages. You picked it up. The scroll was sealed with red wax. You broke the seal gently. Inside was a map of the house. But this map had things you had never seen before. rooms that didn't exist, symbols drawn under the floors, and one large red mark beneath the kitchen. Written in bold letters were the words, "Final route. Last seal. Do not dig unless the light has been awakened." You now understood. Every room you entered had prepared you for this. The candle, the journal, the voice, the ring. They were steps to awaken the final truth. Type "I am unlocking the route to get the blessing 3906. You climbed down from the attic with a Bible and the map. You spread the map across the kitchen table. The red mark on the map lined up with the floor near the kitchen sink. You remembered as a child always feeling cold there. You pushed the table aside and knelt on the ground. The floor looked solid, but when you knocked, it echoed. Oh. You pressed your ear to it and heard a faint heartbeat. Not yours. Something alive was under there, not a person, but a presence. Waiting. You went to the shed and got a small shovel. You returned to the kitchen and began digging carefully. Piece by piece of the wood came up. The candle glowed stronger, deeper, brighter. Then your shovel hit something metal. You cleared the dirt and found a small round door with a strange lock. The same eye and flame symbol was carved into it. The Bible, the candle, and your ring all had the same symbol. This was the seal. This was what Alara meant when she said, "The blood must speak. The ground must breathe." Type "I am the one to get the blessing 7750. You placed the candle beside the lock. The flame turned gold and blue, dancing like it recognized the door. You placed your hand on the symbol. The metal felt warm. Slowly the lock clicked. The round door opened. Beneath it was not darkness, but light. A soft white glow came from below. You saw a staircase made of stone. The air that rose from it smelled like old oil and fresh earth. You knew this was not just a hidden room. This was a holy place. A place no one had entered in years. Maybe ever. You whispered, "I'm ready." And you stepped down. One step, then another. The candle's flame led the way. You didn't know what you would find at the bottom, but you knew one thing for sure. This was where everything would be revealed. Type "I am stepping into truth to get the blessing 6632. You stepped down the stone stairs slowly. The light from the candle showed only a few steps at a time. The air grew colder, but the kind of cold that feels clean, like morning air before sunrise. Each step echoed softly. You were going deeper than the house should have allowed. It was like you had entered a space outside of time. The candle's flame never flickered. It guided you forward without fear. Finally, you reached the bottom. There was a room. Not big, not dark. It was glowing with a soft, gentle light. A holy light. The walls were smooth stone, shaped like a circle. In the center was a small stone table. On the table was a bowl filled with clear oil. The oil sparkled like it was alive. Behind the table stood a tall wooden cross, carved into the wall itself. You stepped forward slowly. There was no dust, no cobwebs. Everything looked untouched. But you knew someone had been here. Or maybe something holy had kept it clean. The place wasn't forgotten. It had been preserved, protected. Save it for you. Type "I am entering the promise to get the blessing 8841. You placed the candle on the table. The oil in the bowl began to ripple. You looked into it and saw not your face, but images. You saw Laura, younger, kneeling in the same room. She placed something in the oil. A necklace. Then the image changed. You saw your mother, standing in the same place, crying. She whispered something, but her voice was too soft to hear. Then the oil turned still again. The light in the room became brighter. You heard a whisper. It said, "Place the ring in the oil." You removed the silver ring from your finger and gently placed it in the oil. The moment it touched, the oil turned golden. The bowl grew warm. The candle's flame rose higher, and then the cross behind the table began to glow. Words appeared on the wall above it. The blood remembers. The light returns. Your eyes filled with tears. This room was more than sacred. It was your family's altar, the place where blessings were buried to protect them from the curse. And now, the time had come to awaken them again. Type "I am rising with light to get the blessing 5205. The whisper returned. Speak his name. You knew what it meant. You had to speak the name that was buried. Not just Micah's, but Abiel's, and Alara's, and your own. All three had been part of the story, and now, you were the one chosen to carry it. You whispered each name gently. Alara, Abiel, Micah, then finally, your own. As soon as you did, the oil in the bowl began to rise into the air like steam. It circled the candle. The flame turned white and gold, and then it entered your chest. You gasped, not from pain, from power. The light didn't burn, it blessed. It filled your heart, your bones, your spirit. You could feel their stories inside you now, their memories, their hopes, their promises, and the truth they tried to protect. It was all inside you now, not to keep hidden, but to carry, to live, to share. You stood taller. Your hands no longer trembled. You had become the light-bearer, the keeper of the house, the one who would never let the blessing be buried again. Type "I am the keeper to get the blessing 3922. As the room began to grow quiet again, the light remained. The ring floated back to the surface of the oil. You picked it up and placed it on your finger once more. It felt warm. Kablia. You looked around the room one last time. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. You were no longer the same. The past was no longer heavy. The silence was no longer fearful. And the house was no longer hiding. You climbed the steps slowly, carrying the candle and the oil bowl. As you reached the top, you didn't look back. You didn't need to. The room below was no longer a secret. It had become part of you. And now, it was time to prepare for the final uncovering, the one that will reveal why this all began. Type "I am walking in purpose to get the blessing 6016. At night, after coming back from the hidden room, you felt a deep tiredness, not just in your body, but in your soul. You laid down on the couch with the candle beside you, still glowing softly. You closed your eyes, and sleep came quickly. But this sleep was different. You were pulled into a dream, more real than any before. You stood outside the house, but everything around it was dark. The trees were gone. The ground was cracked. The windows were covered in black cloth. You heard a voice cry out, "You must hurry. The route is not yet clean." You turned in the dream and saw a man standing far away. He was dressed in white, his face like fire, but not burning. He pointed toward the house and said, "There is one more thing still buried, deeper than the oil, deeper than the blood. The curse still has one breath left. If it is not broken, it will rise again. You wanted to ask who he was, but you couldn't speak. The wind around you picked up. The house behind you began to shake. Then everything went silent. Type I am awake in spirit to get the blessing 8733. You opened your eyes, heart racing. The candle's light was still there, calm and steady. But you knew something had changed. The dream wasn't just a message, it was a warning. You looked at Alara's journal again. On the last page, in faint ink, were words you hadn't seen before. The final seal is not a door. It is a name spoken in fear. A vow broken. A lie accepted. You didn't understand right away. But then you remembered something. Your father's voice, long ago, telling you never to touch the garden soil. You thought it was just for flowers. But maybe it wasn't. You stepped outside into the night. The moon was high. The stars looked sharper than usual. You walked to the back of the house, to the garden. It was overgrown now, dry, forgotten. You knelt down near the center and placed your hand on the soil. It felt colder than it should, like it had been holding something heavy. You began digging with your hands, inch by inch. Your fingers became dirty, but your heart stayed steady. You dug until your hand struck something hard. A wooden box, thin and long, covered in black claws. Type I'm digging deeper to get the blessing 2840. You pulled it out slowly and unwrapped the cloth. The box had your father's initials carved on it. Your hands trembled. You opened it. Inside was a long scroll and a broken chain. The scroll was sealed with red thread. You opened it carefully. It was a contract, a spiritual vow, signed by your father, your grandfather, and someone else, someone named Armoriel. You had never heard that name, but the signature burned your eyes. Blood from light, from something dark. At the bottom of the scroll were these words: "We silence the light to protect our name. Let it be sealed." Tears filled your eyes. This was the curse, a vow made in fear, a choice to hide the light instead of reveal it. You looked at the broken chain, a symbol of that choice, a chain meant to hold back truth. You heard a voice behind you, not loud, not angry, just broken. "I didn't want you to find it." You turned. It was your father, with the memory of him. He looked younger. He said, "We were afraid. We thought we were protecting you. But we only passed on the pain." Type I am breaking the vow to get the blessing 9207. You stood and held the scroll high. You whispered, "I do not accept this vow." The wind picked up around you. The garden began to move. Leaves spun in circles. The sky rumbled. You dropped the scroll into the fire pit beside the garden. You lit a match. The scroll burned, and as it did, the earth beneath your feet shook gently. The broken chain turned to dust in your hand. The candle's flame inside the house flared high and then settled. The curse was breaking. The lie was ending. You looked up at the stars. The same man from your dream appeared in the sky. He spoke again. "The blessing can now rise, but your voice must carry it." You nodded. The past had been opened, the curse uncovered. Now came the final task, to speak the truth, out loud, to those it was meant for. Type I am the voice of release to get the blessing 6644. If this story stirred something deep inside you, it's because your spirit knows the call is real. We are not just telling stories. We are uncovering truth, breaking curses, and releasing light. Every time you give through YouTube Super Thanks, membership, or a PayPal gift link in the description. You are fueling this mission of light. You're not supporting a video. You're opening the door for someone else to wake up to God's voice. Scripture says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." This is your moment to sow into spiritual ground that is shaking. Release your gift and receive your overflow. The next morning, the house felt lighter. The walls, the air, even the floor under your feet, all felt different, like something heavy had been lifted. But your heart told you the journey was not over yet. You walked to the hallway where the mirror hung. For years, it had just shown your face. But now, when you look into it, something else happened. Your reflection stayed still while your body moved. You stepped back, afraid at first. But then the reflection smiled, gently, lovingly. You understood. It wasn't showing fear. It was showing truth. The reflection whispered, "Go back to the room with the crib." You obeyed. You walked slowly down the hallway and entered Micah's room. The candle on the side table was still burning, its flame steady. But something was different. On the wall above the crib, more words had appeared. This time, written in golden light. They read, "Micah was not the end. He was the beginning." You placed your hand on the wall, and the light moved under your palm. It formed a new word, Isaiah. You stepped back. A second name. Type "I am receiving names to get the blessing 2147. You turned to Laura's journal. In the middle of the book, there were several blank pages you had skipped before. But now, words had appeared, in fresh ink. Isaiah with the promise, it read. Micah with the key. But one more must speak the final word. You looked at your hands, your arms, your reflection. You knew it now. You were not just the seeker. You were the speaker. The vessel. The one who must carry all the names. And most importantly, reveal your own name. The one heaven had written before time began. You sat down on the floor and began to pray. You didn't use fancy words. You just said, "God, show me my name. The one you gave me before I was born. The name buried beneath the lies. The name written in your light." The room grew quiet. The candle dimmed for a moment. Then, a breeze blew through the window, and the flame rose higher than ever before. You felt something stir inside your chest. A memory, but not yours. A knowing that came from heaven. Type "I am ready to know to get the blessing 5793. You opened the Bible from the attic and placed it beside the candle. The flame touched the pages. One verse lit up. Isaiah 43:1. I have called you by name. You are mine. You heard the words as if God himself whispered them in your ear. I have called you by name. Tears rolled down your cheeks. The voice said again, "You are not who the world called you. You are who I called you." You placed your hand over your heart and spoke out loud, "Then speak, Lord. I am listening." In that moment, the candlelight moved across the room and began to write letters on the far wall. Slowly, gently, a name appeared. Adonil. You didn't know what it meant, but your spirit did. It was your name. Your real name. The name your soul had carried since birth. The name buried beneath pain, lies, silence, and fear. Now it had risen, and it had power. Type "I am Adonil" to get the blessing 3465. You repeated the name softly. Adonil. The whole house seemed to respond. The floors creaked gently. The walls warmed. Even the wind outside hushed, as if listening. You were no longer just a child of the house. You were now its voice, its light, its priest. Laura had written, "When the true name is spoken, the foundation will rise." You looked at the ground under the crib. A small crack appeared, glowing faintly with gold. Not danger, blessing. A sign. The final truth was near, and it would not stay hidden much longer. You stood in the center of the room and declared, "I am not what they named me. I am Archangel, and I will finish what was started." The candle burned brighter. The mirror down the hall shimmered, and above the house, clouds began to part. The heavens were listening, watching, waiting. You had been called, and now you had answered. Type "I am awakened" in name to get the blessing 7190. You stood in the quiet room, heart still repeating the name, Archangel. Something had changed inside you, not just in your spirit, but in your voice. You felt stronger, more alive, more connected to the truth. You looked at the crack beneath the crib. It was glowing softly, like gold had been hidden beneath the wood. You knelt and touched it. The moment your fingers made contact, a soft hum filled the room. Not loud, not frightening, just pure. A sound that felt like it came from heaven's breath. The floor beneath you began to shift gently. You moved the crib aside and cleared the dust from the floorboards. The glow spread, forming a circle. It was like the house had marked a final door, one that was never meant to be opened until now. You took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm not afraid." The hum grew louder like the house agreed. You pressed your hand in the center of the circle. The floor began to open, not like something breaking, but like something being unsealed. The boards moved by themselves, revealing a round pit filled with soft white light. Type "I am unsealing truth" to get the blessing 4050. You leaned over the pit. It wasn't deep, maybe only 4 feet down. But inside, there was a small wooden box and a scroll wrapped in golden cloth. You climbed in carefully and held both in your hands. The scroll was warm. The box was marked with 3 names, Laura, Michael, and Archangel. You gasped. Your name had been written here long before you discovered it. This was not by accident. Heaven had written the ending before you began. You opened the scroll first. Inside were 7 lines, one for each generation of your family. Each line carried a message. They were not curses. They were confessions. Words your ancestors had written in secret but never spoken aloud. One said, "I hid the truth to protect my son." Another said, "I changed my name because I feared the light in me." The last one said, "To the child who opens this scroll, your light will heal all the names before you." You read the words over and over. These weren't just voices from the past. They were keys, each line unlocking the next part of your destiny. Type "I am the 7th key" to get the blessing 8882. You open the wooden box. Inside was a silver necklace with a small flame-shaped pendant. It glowed faintly. Underneath it was a folded piece of cloth. You opened it. It was your baby blanket, the one your mother said was lost. The flame pendant rested on top of it like a final seal. You placed the necklace around your neck. The moment it touched your chest, your body filled with warmth. Not from heat, but from truth. You saw flashes in your mind. Laura lighting the candle. Michael reaching for the sky. Your father crying beside the garden. All of it was coming together now. You climbed out of the pit and sat beside it. The glow remained inside, like the earth itself was still speaking. You closed the scroll and placed it beside the journal. Then you spoke aloud. Every lie is now broken. Every truth is now free. Every name is now healed. The wind outside roared suddenly. The windows rattled. The mirror down the hallway cracked softly, just in the corner. Not from damage, from release. Type I am speaking freedom to get the blessing 2384. You walked through the house slowly, touching every wall. Every step felt sacred. You weren't walking through your childhood anymore. You were walking through a prophecy. Every room had spoken. Every voice had returned. And now, only one thing remained: to let the blessing rise. Not just for you, but for everyone who had been waiting without knowing. Everyone who had walked in silence. Everyone who had been told to forget. You whispered one last time, "I don't know lives." And the house whispered back, "The ground remembers." You knew now. The secret wasn't meant to be hidden. It was meant to be passed on. The blessing wasn't buried to stay. It was buried to grow. And now, it was time to bring it into the world. Type I am the harvest to get the blessing 9011. The next morning, the whole house felt warm. The wind outside was soft. A light coming through the windows felt golden, almost like sunlight from another world. You stood in the kitchen holding the candle, still glowing bright. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt healed. You walked back to the room where the pit had opened. The floor was still glowing softly. The circle had closed, but the light remained. You sat down beside it and took a deep breath. You whispered, "What now, Lord?" The answer came in peace, not words. It was a feeling that filled your heart. You were not just supposed to uncover the past. You were supposed to release the future. You walked outside and stood in the backyard. The tree was still there, its branches wide and strong. You remembered the day you tried to dig beside it as a child. You placed your hand on the trunk. It was warm. Something pulsed inside the bark, like a heartbeat. You looked up and saw 3 birds sitting on the highest branch. Alara, Michael, and Abiel, watching. Type I am chosen to rise to get the blessing 5406. You knelt on the ground beneath the tree. The wind wrapped around you like a blanket. You spoke softly, "The curse is gone. The silence is broken. Let the blessing rise now." The ground beneath the tree began to shake lightly, not in fear, but in agreement. Then, something began to grow. A single flower. It goes through the soil slowly, glowing with golden light. You watched as it opened. It wasn't like any flower you had ever seen. Its petals looked like flame. Its center glowed like oil. It wasn't just a flower. It was a sign. The blessing had risen. You reach out and touch it gently. The moment your fingers made contact, the light from the flower moved through the yard like a wave. It touched every corner, every root, every stone. Even the house behind you lit up from within. Not from electricity, from glory. You stood and looked around. Everything was quiet, but not empty. Heaven was watching. Your family was watching. The names that had been buried were now spoken again. And the ground that once held pain now held promise. Type I am standing in glory to get the blessing 7701. You walked back into the house. The candle on the table had melted fully now, but the flame still burned. You picked up Alara's journal one last time. On the very last page, new words had appeared. Whitman Brided. If you're reading this, then the blessing has risen. Use it. Don't keep it hidden. The ground gave it to you. Now give it to the world. You nodded. You understood. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of your mission. You were no longer just a seeker of truth. You were now a speaker of light. You opened your mouth and spoke out loud. I carry the blessing. I release it. Let every heart that needs it receive. The house echoed your voice. Light pulsed once more. You weren't alone. You had never been alone. Heaven had walked with you the entire time. From the attic to the basement. From the letters to the mirror. From the voice beneath the stairs to the name in the flame. Type I am the light spreader to get the blessing 6258. You looked at your hands. The ring on your finger glowed gently. The necklace rested on your chest. The scrolls were wrapped and placed on the mantle. You had uncovered everything. But more than that, you had accepted your calling. The curse had ended with you. The silence had broken through your voice. The buried light had become the flame you now carried. You stood in the center of the house and whispered one final time, I'm ready. And the ground responded with peace. Type I am fulfilled to get the blessing 8422. That evening, the sky turned deep orange, and a soft golden light spread over the house. You sat in the living room, Laura's journal on your lap, the scroll beside you, the candle still burning its final glow. The house felt completely different now. It wasn't a place of fear anymore. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where something holy had been restored. But even though peace filled the air, you felt something was still waiting. A final step, a final word. You whispered, is there more? And your spirit said, yes. Speak it. You walked to the mirror in the hallway. The crack was still there from before, but now it looked like a path instead of a wound. You looked into your reflection, and this time it didn't just show you. It showed every name that had walked before you. Laura's eyes, Micah's smile, Abiel's strength, and your name, Adonal, glowing in light above them all. You raised your hand and touched the mirror. I see them. I see me. I am all of us. And I speak for every voice that was buried. Type I am the final voice to get the blessing 5813. Suddenly, the reflection shifted. You saw a crowd behind you in the mirror. Met people in the house, people in spirit. Your ancestors. Their hands were lifted. Their faces were full of light. They didn't speak, but their presence said everything. Thank you. They had waited so long for someone to rise, and you had done it. You had spoken the name. You had broken the curse. You had opened the ground. You had released the blessing. Now came the moment to send it into the world. You walked to the backyard one last time. The golden flower was still glowing beneath the tree. You knelt and placed your hand over it. The light moved into your hand. It didn't hurt. It felt like oil, like power, like peace. The light spread across your arms, your chest, your face, and then it shot upward, into the sky. A long ribbon of gold stretched from the earth to the heavens. A signal. A message. Again. You looked up and whispered, they will know. Type I am the messenger to get the blessing 9981. You returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table. You took out a clean page from the back of the journal and began to write. You wrote the full story. Every name, every room, every object, every voice, every truth. You wrote it not to keep it for yourself, but to pass it on. Someone else would come after you. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for years. But they would come. And when they did, they would need to know the story. Your story. Your story. Evan's story. The candle beside you flickered one last time and then went out. But the room didn't go dark. The light was no longer in the flame. It was in you. You stood up and said, "Let this be the last silence. Let this be the first sound of freedom." And at that very moment, the house breathed its final breath of old memory and exhaled pure, fresh peace. You had finished what was started. The blessing had risen, and it had found its voice. You. Type "I am the sound of healing" to get the blessing 4088. As night fell, the stars above the house shined brighter than ever. And the house, once full of hidden cries and untold stories, was now full of peace. You looked around one last time, then sat quietly. You didn't need music. You didn't need answers. You had something better. You had truth. And truth had set everything free. You were no longer just the child of this house. You were now the keeper of its light and the giver of its blessing. Type "I am complete" to get the blessing 1990. You stood at the door of the house one final time. The light from inside touched your back, while the rising sun greeted your face. Everything was quiet, yet everything was alive. This house had once been filled with silence, hidden pain, and buried truth. But now, it breathed with purpose. You looked over your shoulder one last time. The mirror, the journal, the candle's ashes, the altar in the basement, they all remained in place. But they weren't just objects anymore. They were witnesses. You closed your eyes and thanked God for the journey, for the voices that guided you, for the strength that rose when you felt weak. You whispered, "Let this house shine long after I leave. Let it keep calling those who are ready." And just as you spoke, a breeze passed through the open door. The curtains lifted. The walls shivered. It was like the house was saying goodbye, but also, thank you. You stepped outside with the journal in your hands. The blessing had begun in silence, but it would continue in sound. You had a message to carry, a story to tell, and more than that, you had a light to share. You were no longer afraid. You didn't doubt your name. You didn't question your place. You knew who you were. You were Adonil, the light bearer, the truth speaker, the blessing revealed. You walked away slowly, never needing to look back. The past was no longer holding you. It was walking beside you. Every step you took was guided. Every word you would speak would be covered in light. The world wouldn't understand at first, but they would feel it. The oil in your voice, the flame in your eyes, the truth in your silence. And those who had ears would hear. Those who had hearts would awaken. The house behind you would remain, not as a secret, not as a shadow, but as a doorway for others who were also ready to remember. Type "I am the light" to get the blessing 7777. If this journey stirred something inside you, then you know this wasn't just a story. It was a spiritual calling. When you support this mission through YouTube Super Thanks, membership, or a gift through PayPal link in the video description, you are lighting the path for someone else to remember who they are. You are helping raise what was buried in others. God's word says, "You are the light of the world." A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Your support isn't a gift to us. It's a torch in someone else's darkness. So now, and may rivers of divine increase return to your life. Give not because we ask to, but because heaven called,